Morning, folks, and welcome to today's episode called Dietrich Mateschitz, the Yeti behind Red Bull. I wanted to cover this story because, as some of the listeners will already know, I'm a big Formula One fan, and if you follow Formula One, you can't ignore Red Bull. And I kind of knew the bones of the story about how Mateschitz took this weird Thai tonic that was being used by truck drivers and turned it into a multi-billion dollar global empire. But when you dig into it, he did more than just launch a product. He created a whole new drinks category. And then to promote it, he didn't simply just attach Red Bull to extreme sports. Red Bull became a part of extreme sports to such an extent that they even created their own extreme sports. And in my opinion, the most extraordinary thing about it all, and I'm saying this as somebody who drinks Red Bull every now and then. I drank a lot more of it when I was younger. But what's extraordinary is that the product itself, it doesn't really taste nice. So how did he do it? It's a cracking story. Enjoy. And before I dig into it, I just want to mention that at the end of this show, I have a new section where I read out listeners' emails. So stick around. So Red Bull, it was founded by two men, Dietrich Mateschitz and Kallio Uvidia. So the man behind the original creation was this Kallio Uvidia. And I'm not going to focus on him too much. First of all, because there's very little information on him. He was extremely reclusive. And second of all, because while he did create the product, I think, the evolution of Red Bull from what it was in Thailand to becoming this global brand, the credit has to go to Mateschitz for this. But let's look at Uvidia anyway. He was born sometime between 1922 and 1932 in central Thailand. And again, that's the thing about him. He was so private and reclusive that we don't even know his exact birth date. He was born into a poor Chinese family. In the 1960s, he founded a small pharmaceutical company. He was producing antibiotics. He was also licensing products from Western companies. But he also turned to concocting a beverage that he called Creating Deng, which means Red Bull in Thai. And it was loaded with caffeine, with an amino acid called taurine, and a carbohydrate called, and I hope I get this right, glucuronolactone. Anyway, that's how I pronounce it. And at this stage, the product, it was sold in small glass bottles. It wasn't carbonated, more like a cough syrup. And sales took off though, because at the same time, the Thailand economy was booming. And so now you had a growing workforce, and the drink became popular with factory workers, construction workers, taxi drivers, truckers, and it became the top-selling energy drink in the country. And it was also now being exported to neighbouring countries. So Vividuia was, quite successful businessman at this stage. Now, it's also important to note that the logo was created at this stage. I mean, they made some tweaks to it when they launched it in the West, but it was very much similar to what you see now. And also, Vividia was sponsoring sports like Thai boxing. So that was there from the very start. So then in 1982, Dietrich Mateschitz, he enters the story. And while he was also a very private man, we do know a good bit more about his background. So he was born in 1944 in Austria, and both his parents were school teachers of Syrian background. And he described himself as a Syrian cosmopolitan. And from a very young age, Mateschitz, he was an avid athlete. He played soccer or football, and then more seriously, he took on downhill skiing. And skiing wasn't just a hobby for him. It became ingrained in his identity. So like decades before he'd build a brand that was synonymous with extreme sports, he was already a member of that tribe. And so the marketing strategy that would later feel, I suppose, so revolutionary was, in fact, it was a very authentic extension of Mateschitz's own identity. And this is important in my opinion, because authenticity, I believe, is central to understanding who Mateschitz was and how he achieved success with Red Bull. Now, he went to college to study business administration in Vienna University, and the reason I'm laughing at this, first of all, he funded himself by giving skiing instructions and stints as a tour guide, but he didn't graduate until he was 28. He spent a full decade in college. Now, on paper, you would obviously think that, 10 years in college would probably show a lack of focus, But this is what he said about it. He said, it's a good time, so you shouldn't shorten it unnecessarily. And this is important as well, I think. I don't want to psychoanalyze him too much, but when you look at this through the prism of what he achieved and how he achieved it, spending 10 years in college is very, very much in line with this strong streak of independence, of doing things his way, not the usual or the prescribed way, and also, crucially, living life to the full, because he really lived life to the full for his 10 years in college. Now, his first job out of college was Unilever, and then he went to work at Jacob's Coffee, which gave him direct experience in marketing a legal caffeinated stimulating drink. He was obviously good at his job because he rose up through the ranks, and in 79 to 84 he was international marketing director for Blendex. It was a German cosmetics and personal hygiene company that was later acquired by Procter & Gamble. Now, the job came with a lot of travel, and by the time he was 38, Mateschitz, he felt disillusioned, he said burnt out by, I suppose, the corporate grind. He began to see what to most people on the outside looking in would be a successful career. He saw it through this lens of monotony, describing the endless cycles of flights, suits, hotels, bars, with a single word, and I love this, he called it grey. So it was a sense not just of boredom, but a lack of independence, of vitality. And of course, the brand that he would eventually create was the exact opposite of this grey. It was vibrant, colourful, risky, bursting with life. So we get to 1982. We got 38-year-old Mateschitz lands in Thailand. He's tired, he's jet-lagged, and he notices that everyone is drinking this Creating Dang. So he tried it, and he said the effect was immediate. The jet lag lifted. His energy surged. He'd never come across a drink like this. So he sensed an opportunity. But the real spark or genius of Mateschitz was in how he chose to see this opportunity. Creating Dang, remember, small glass bottle, no frills, sold cheap to labourers and truck drivers who needed a jolt. But Mateschitz looked at this and didn't see cheap or local. He saw the opposite. He saw performance. He saw status, speed, because he ran it through his own filter. A background in selling overpriced consumer goods in the West, and a life built around high adrenaline sports like skiing. And it came out the other side, transformed. Not this working class pick-me-up, but a premium, how would you call it? Premium edge for people who wanted to push harder. And it was this strategic leap from blue-collar utility to premium lifestyle accessory. That alone was the most single important insight of his career. And it was the foundation upon which he built the whole Red Bull empire. Now, as luck would have it, Vuvadia was one of Blendex's Asian licensees. So Mateschitz met up with him and pitched his idea. Pretty simple. Adapt Creating Dang for the Western consumer and create a global brand. Vuvadia agreed. They each put in $500,000, a huge sum for both. I mean, for Mateschitz, it was his whole life savings. For Vuvadia, who was doing quite well at this stage, I'm sure $500,000 was still a big sum for him. And they formed Red Bull GmbH, which would be based in Austria. Ownership was split 49% to Mateschitz, 49% to Vuvadia, and 2% to Vuvadia's son. So, this arrangement did give the Vuvadia family a controlling 51% majority share, but in return, Mateschitz secured what really is the single most important clause in their agreement as far as he was concerned. It was explicitly agreed that he would run the company and have complete operational control, because he needed that, because he understood that his vision for repositioning the brand, it was non-negotiable. And so he had secured the autonomy that he really had been craving for years. Mateschitz was never going to be a corporate man climbing the greasy ladder. This was his big chance. Now, first came the adaptation. So Creating Dang was Syrup thick, non-carbonated and very sweet, and they say closer to medicine than soda. I mean, other than the non-carbonated part, it sounds pretty much like it is today. But they actually did thin the formula. They added carbonation. They kept caffeine, the B vitamins, the taurine. And then came the branding. I love this part because Mateschitz got in contact with Johannes Kastner. He was an old university friend who owned a small agency in Frankfurt. And he asked him to design the can and come up with a slogan. Now, first of all, the can. They had very little budget. So Kastner did the job in return for Mateschitz doing some freelance work for him. And over a year, they tested 50 designs on the can before landing on this slim silver and blue can, while keeping, but tweaking only very slightly, the original logo of the two Red Bulls charging against that golden sun. That was the easy part. Coming up with the slogan, Kastner said, it nearly broke him. So he said, idea after idea, and Mateschitz rejected them all. Finally, at 3 a.m, inspiration struck. Kastner scribbled down, Red Bull gives you wings. He phoned Mateschitz straight away and warned him this was his very last attempt, he said. And as soon as he said, Red Bull gives you wings, Mateschitz shouted back, that's it. Now, Kastner's perseverance and the loyalty he showed to Mateschitz, it has paid off handsomely. 40 years later, his agency still works with Red Bull, which must be worth at least tens of millions of euro every year. And his ad agency has offices all around the world. So, great success for him as well. So by 1985, they had the formula, they had the can, they had the slogan, they had it all. And Mateschitz ordered market research, and the results were brutal. People hated everything about it. They hated the branding, they hated the concept, but more than anything else, of course, they hated the taste. And this is where Mateschitz has to be given so much credit, because he didn't let the market research deter him. He actually saw all of those negatives as proof that he was onto something, because he didn't want Red Bull to fit into an existing soft drinks category. He wanted to create a whole new category. So it had to be everything that was against people's inclinations, I suppose. And the negative feedback on the taste, he didn't care. This is what he said. He said, it's not just another flavoured sugar water, it's an efficiency product. Taste is of no importance whatsoever. So, in other words, taste, for a consumer good, this is nuts, taste was going to take a backseat to identity. Because as part of Mateschitz' plan, Red Bull was going to sell identity better than anyone else. So, April 1987, the first can of Red Bull was sold in Austria, and its price was about $2, making it by far the most expensive soft drink on the shelf. And again, deliberate. As Mateschitz explained, if we'd only had a 15% price premium, we'd merely be a premium brand among soft drinks and not a different category altogether. And that also explains, of course, why they wanted a totally different can size. Reactions, of course, were polarised. Young people loved it, newspapers mocked it as cough syrup, teachers warned students it was dangerous, and Mateschitz turned the outrage into marketing. As he said, in the beginning, high school teachers who were against the product were at least as important as the students who were for it. And sales told the story. They sold over 1 million cans in Austria in that first year. Forgive the quick interruption, but I want to let you know about our subscription service. For just $1.99 a month, you get every weekly episode completely ad-free, so you can enjoy the story without any interruptions. Subscribers also unlock a library of special episodes from when Keith was still co-hosting with me, including a 3-part deep dive on Disney and a 2-parter on Guinness. They're brilliant. Now, Keith isn't part of the show anymore, but I still have a good few hour-long episodes that I recorded with him, and they're going to be released on the 1st of every month over the next few months, again, for subscribers only. All of that for just $1.99 a month. If you'd like to join, it's really simple. On Spotify, just tap on the little lock symbol next to the bonus episodes in the feed. On Apple Podcasts, click on the show and you'll see the option to subscribe. Or if you prefer Patreon, head to patreon.com/Great Business Stories. There's also a link in the About section at the top of the podcast page to the Patreon page. And of course, if subscribing isn't for you right now, that's grand. Following the show and telling a friend about it is a huge help. Alright, back to the story. By 1989, it was in Hungary and Slovenia. These were test markets. They were young, they were open to Western brands, and crucially, they had looser regulations. But the big target was Germany. That was Europe's largest economy. Regulators pushed back on the taurine. Mateschitz, he came back with meters, he said, and meters of scientific evidence proving safety. And eventually approval came, and it became a huge success in Germany. So by 1994, Britain was the next big market. By this stage, it had taken over most of Europe, except countries like France, which had banned it due to health concerns, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So Britain, big market, and again an explosion in sales, but with a bit of a twist, because this is when vodka and Red Bull emerged as the nightclub favourite. And I remember this time clearly because my brother was one of the first Red Bull reps in the Irish market, and for 2 to 3 years, man, we drank a lot of Red Bull and vodka. I mean, it was great for keeping you going during a night out, but God, you'd feel it the next day. Inside the company, the culture reflected the brand. Anti-bureaucratic, fast-moving. Mateschitz, he recruited young people who were frustrated by corporate hierarchies. He gave them a lot of freedom to experiment, but he remained hands-on when it came to anything to do with the brand. Employees called him the Yeti. Rarely seen, but his fingerprints were everywhere. 1997, Red Bull entered the US, first the California market and then a handful of Western states, and it seeded itself in clubs, in the hands of programmers in Silicon Valley, pulling all-nighters, and the positioning, it was pretty clear. Red Bull was the anti-Coca-Cola. It was smaller, it was cooler. Crucially, it was more effective, because that's what it was. It was an energy drink. So that's the way they positioned themselves. And then they came up with these events. So they were sponsoring an awful lot of extreme sports. But in 1997, they hosted their first created event. This was the Flugtag, German for Flying Day. So contestants, you've seen this on YouTube by now, I'm sure, because it's gone global. Contestants built absurd flying machines and launched themselves off a pier into the Danube River. Crowds turned out in droves. The event, it was wild, it was ridiculous, and it was pure Red Bull. It became an annual tradition spreading worldwide. And as I said, by this stage, Red Bull had already become a regular, almost, I suppose you could say, ubiquitous presence at extreme sporting events like snowboarding, skateboarding, mountain biking. But the Flugtag events, that marked the start of something very, very significant, because it planted the seed in Mateschitz's mind that Red Bull could create its own events and own its own sports. Because traditional advertising for Red Bull, it was almost irrelevant. They only began running quirky animated TV ads in the late 90s, very tongue-in-cheek. And those ads, they haven't really changed much over the last 25 years. Most of the budget, about 30% of their revenue, goes into marketing, and mostly guerrilla marketing. And the mantra has always been clear. We don't sell a product, we sell a lifestyle. But I mentioned controversy, and of course, as it gained popularity, huge controversy followed the drink. Like throughout the 90s, and indeed up to the present day, almost every year there are cases of people who die after drinking Red Bull. But an EU committee in the 90s reviewed the evidence and found no proof that the ingredients were dangerous at normal levels. And look, I'm not a doctor or scientist, but I did look into it, and all the evidence points to Red Bull being pretty safe when consumed in moderate levels, about 1 or 2 cans a day, although Mateschitz himself claims to have drank about 10 or 12 cans a day. But of course, drinking huge amounts of it, either on its own or with alcohol, isn't good. It's not good if you're a young child because there's a lot of caffeine in it, and it's not good if you've got any underlying health conditions like heart conditions or high blood pressure. But in the 90s and early 2000s, that controversy was at its highest. Like regulators in France, in Denmark and Norway, they were all raising alarms about Red Bull. France banned Red Bull for years and years. But of course, Mateschitz, he just leaned into it. He said, we expected it. It was part of the strategy from the beginning, because the most dangerous thing for a branded product is low interest. Now, of course, he was right, because all of this controversy, it just got to drink lots more free publicity. By the end of the 90s, Red Bull was selling hundreds of millions of cans across more than 50 countries. It became Austria's most valuable company, worth about 10 billion, making both founders multi-billionaires. Yovadia, he stayed very quiet in Thailand, and Mateschitz became Austria's richest man and bought himself some lavish toys like a hangar full of vintage airplanes, a private island in Fiji. But he was also very low profile. And I know this, as a Formula One fan, you'd see the Sky presenters going up and down the paddocks. You'd rarely ever see Mateschitz at the Formula One. He was there, but he kept a low profile. He never wore suits, nearly always tanned, sporting a 3-day beard, but he assiduously avoided giving interviews. Now, I did mention that the Flugtag event planted a seed in Mateschitz's mind. Well, this came to fruition then in January 2001 on a frozen river in Stockholm when Red Bull staged their first ever crashed ice race. I didn't know about this event, but it sounds nuts. They built a twisting 300-metre chute of solid ice and told skaters and hockey players to hurl themselves down it at 50 miles an hour. Like the spectacle, it was so popular, so gripping. It became an annual series, then a world championship. Next, they launched X-Fighters, a freestyle motocross showdown. Then there was Rampage, this brutal but massively entertaining mountain bike contest in Utah. And since then, there's been cliff diving, which I love. I think the cliff diving is amazing. There's mountain climbing, soapbox racing, which my girls love because it's just so silly. Flying aerobatics, the list just goes on. And every outrageous event they organised turned into free press. And it's so true. I remember when the cliff diving came to Ireland, I think it was on one of the islands off the coast, and it was a huge event. The amount of publicity it garnered for the brand was just unbelievable. But then came the huge move. This is when Red Bull got into Formula One. And, I'm a Formula One fan, so this is something that I'm particularly interested in. Initially, they were just a sponsor of the Sauber team. But in 2004, they bought the struggling Jaguar Formula One team from Ford for just a symbolic $1, and they also took on the debts. They also then bought a second Formula One team in 2006. This is now called Racing Bull. It's changed its name over the years, and it's the junior team to the main Red Bull Formula One team. And to most people at that time, Red Bull's entry into Formula One, it looked like a joke. And how can you blame them for thinking it was a joke? You have teams like Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes. These were racing titans with a strong pedigree in engineering excellence. Red Bull was an energy drink. I mean, it just sounded like a publicity stunt. But Mateschitz was deadly serious about this, and his seriousness can be seen in the amount of time and money he invested in this. He hired, first of all, a 31-year-old Christian Horner as team principal, who became the youngest team boss in Formula One. Now, Horner had zero Formula One experience, but he had a track record of winning in junior formulas, and it was an inspired choice by Mateschitz. And even more crucially, Mateschitz gave Horner an awful lot of autonomy. And this is another thing that I admire about the guy, because too many times in sports, you see these billionaire owners acting like they know more about the sport than the people they hire to do the actual job. I mean, it's a joke. But Mateschitz was able to check his own ego. He was able to leave it at the door. He understood that he knew very, very little about Formula One. And so he was willing to hire the people that he thought were best to do the job and then let them off to do their job. And success in Formula One takes time. And again, to his credit, Mateschitz was willing to give Horner and the Red Bull Formula One team that time. Like Red Bull, they didn't start winning immediately, but they kept on improving with every season. And finally, in 2010, 6 years after he invested in the team, Sebastian Vettel won the Formula One drivers' titles. Analysts estimated that the media exposure alone for the 2010 season was worth over £200 million, twice what the team had actually cost that season. And motorsport wasn't the only thing he got involved with. Red Bull was buying football clubs. In 2005, they took over Austria's SV Salzburg, rebranded it Red Bull Salzburg. In 2006, they took over the New York Metro Stars soccer team and has since been rebranded New York Red Bulls. And at the time of recording, Red Bull has a majority ownership in 6 football clubs around the world. He just kept on building and building the brand. By 2010, Red Bull was selling over 4 billion cans a year in more than 160 countries, generating profits of about 1 billion. The Formula One success continued, winning both the drivers and the constructors titles from 2010 to 2014. So a remarkable run of success. But all of that pales in comparison to October 2012, when they pulled off one of, I think, the greatest stunts in marketing history. It's called the Stratus Jump. So for 5 years, in secret, like this is an incredible undertaking. 5 years in secret, the company had been preparing for this. And the plan to send Austrian daredevil Felix Baumgartner, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, to the edge of space and then have him jump. The total cost is estimated to have been between $30 million and $50 million. Like engineers, they built a capsule. A stratospheric balloon carried him 128,000 feet above New Mexico. His pressurized suit then was covered in Red Bull logos. And then standing on his tiny platform, the curve of the earth beneath him, you could see it. Baumgartner spoke into his mic. I'm sure in lines that he had rehearsed so many times because they just sound very rehearsed. But anyway, good lines. He said, "I know the whole world is watching now and I wish the world could see what I see. Sometimes you have to go up really high to understand how small you are." And then he jumped. He plummeted at like 843 miles per hour, breaking the sound barrier. At one point, he tumbled violently, spinning so fast that mission control feared that he'd black out. And it was a proper mission control. Like this was like, if you see NASA for a space launch, slightly smaller version, but no expense spared. Anyway, Baumgartner, he recovered, he pulled his chute, and he landed safely on the desert. And the world was transfixed. I remember it well. The event was carried on TV stations in 50 countries. The live webcast racked up 52 million views, making it the most watched live stream in history at that time. Within days, over 1 billion people had seen the footage. Like what I love about this stunt, which it was, or event, it blurred the line between science, sport, and spectacle. It was, if you want to think of it anyway, it was like advertising that looked like history, and it worked. Like the media value generated was estimated to have been at least $500 million. And so all of these marketing stunts, promotions, events, Formula One racing, like while they might all appear diverse, even scattergun in some ways, there is of course a very obvious and strong thread running through them all. Red Bull was in the business of selling a lifestyle, an identity defined by adrenaline, adventure, the relentless pursuit of peak performance. And while he wasn't a micromanager, all of this was directed and overseen by Mateschitz. In March 2012, co-founder Kallio Uvidia, he died at the age of either 80 or 90. No one seems to know. And just a few months after his death, a scandal erupted back in Thailand. Varayut boss Uvidia, his grandson, was accused of a fatal hit and run. He drove his black Ferrari at 177 kilometers per hour in an 80 kilometer per hour zone, and he smashed into the back of a police officer's motorbike, dragged the officer's body for around 100 meters, refusing to stop, and sped home. The policeman died. And a trail of oil leaking from his sports car led investigators to Uvidia's luxury home, and medical tests reportedly taken in the hours after the crash showed alcohol and cocaine in his bloodstream. He fled the country. He spent a decade globetrotting, snowboarding in Japan, and became a symbol of the untouchable rich in Thailand, where they have a saying that only the poor go to jail. In 2020, when the charges were dropped, outrage, of course, it exploded in Thailand. Protesters called for a boycott, and to date, the only people who've been charged in relation to this case are those that covered up for Uvidia, including a former police chief and a former deputy attorney general. Now, Mateschitz was furious. Apparently in private, he practically disowned the Thai heir. And the scandal, it has tarnished the brand in its homeland. Now, Mateschitz himself, he's also been involved in controversy with his own private media industries. He owned a TV channel that was described as the home channel of the Austrian right wing. It was pushing anti-immigration views, COVID conspiracy theories. And look, I'm going to go a bit off track here. I don't agree with his politics, but given everything that's been happening over the last week, and I'm referring to the murder of Charlie Kirk, another person whose politics I don't agree with at all, I'm trying to be a bit more reflective, a bit slower to judge people who I disagree with politically. And I think we got to be a lot more respectful and not as hot-headed to judge people and not wanting to be right all the time. And there's a fantastic quote from Stephen Fry where he said, "I believe one of the greatest human failings is to prefer to be right than to be effective." Anyway, that's my moral rant for today. So throughout the 2010s, Red Bull has encountered increased competition, especially from Monster Energy drink, and its dominance in Formula 1. It took a hit for many years because Mercedes really came to the fore, winning from 2014 all the way to 2020. But then Red Bull roared back in 2021, and for any Formula 1 fan, you know what I'm going to mention. It's the Formula 1 season-ending race, one of the most dramatic races ever, when Max Verstappen won the Drivers' Championship in a hugely controversial finale in Abu Dhabi. I mean, a fantastic race that he shouldn't have won by right, but what a spectacle. Then, on October 22nd, 2022, Dietrich Mateschitz died at 78 after a long battle with cancer. His only son, Mark, who inherited his $25 billion fortune, he announced a new structure. A professional board would run the company while he would act only as a shareholder. And the Yeti family, they approved that structure, and now you have a trio of executives run the company. And it's still in pretty healthy shape. Like in 2024, it had revenues of $12.4 billion, but Monster is gaining ground with revenues of $7.5 billion. So, what to make of Mateschitz? I mean, I come from a marketing background, and as a marketer, you just have to admire what he did. First of all, he took a product that doesn't really taste nice. He put it in a smaller can, charged a massive premium, and created the energy drink category. He's responsible for that whole new category. He then attached the brand to extreme sports so that Red Bull and extreme sports were synonymous with each other. And why this worked is multifaceted. I mean, we all know that sports, it delivers moments that stick. And, by attaching itself to sports, Red Bull harnessed moments to craft experiences that people remember. That's true. But any brand can do that. What set Red Bull and Mateschitz apart is that he then created new sports, really fun events, amazing stunts, all of them that were not only aligned directly with the brand's own image, but crucially, they aligned with Mateschitz himself. He was an extreme sports guy from a young age. And not only that, his whole MO was driven by a sense of freedom to do things that brought joy. Here's a quote from him. "Money was never a driving force for me. It always came last on the list of motivating things. For me, the driving force has always been freedom and independence and joy in my projects. Joy is the basic requirement for everything you do." So everything about Red Bull sports, stunts, events had this freedom and joy that's so authentic it can't be faked. People see through it if it's fake. And it all came from Mateschitz. Even though you'd hardly ever see him, his fingerprints were all over them. So it'll be very, very interesting to see if Red Bull can maintain that authenticity with him gone. I think Mateschitz will have to go down as one of the greatest marketers of the last 40 years. And the success of Red Bull and how it was achieved make it such a great business story. Now, and with that, of course, we come to a new section in the show. A big shout out to Peter, who emailed me to suggest that I cover Panda as a story. Now, for those of you not from Ireland, Panda is a waste management company that came to dominate the sector over the last 2 decades, and it was built by a very, very colourful and driven guy called Eamon Waters, who left school at 17 and built the company from nothing. It's a great story, and I will cover it at some stage. So, big shout out and thank you to Peter. And remember, if you have any comments, any corrections, or any story that you'd like us to cover, email me at info@gbspod.com. All the best, folks.